All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to another Learning Tech Talks where we are exploring the landscape of all things technology. I am looking forward to today. I look forward to pretty much every one of my episodes, but this is on one of my favorite, which is a long list of topics. But when it comes to digital adoption and what that means, but this is mixing that with another one of my favorite topics, which is frontline workers, the often overlooked population of the workforce that is actually one of the most important. And so we're going to talk about where that intersects, why that matters, and what we can be doing about it. And this is going to be a great conversation. So I'm joined by Justin Lake with Skyfull. So thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to get started with this.
Christopher, thank you for having me. I've been a long-time listener of the show, first-time guest, and excited to be here and visit.
Well, there you go. And we were nerding out about content creation backstage because you have a podcast as well. So there's something about talking with other creators that gets a little bit nerdy. But we kept that conversation backstage, so we won't.
It is, and we have more to talk about after the show as well, I'm sure.
That's right. That's exactly right. But let's jump right into it, because when we say, well, first of all, I think we're going to need to do some definition up front in two ways, because digital adoption and frontline worker can be very ambiguous categories, and what they mean to someone may be very different from what they mean to something else. Yeah. So let's start with the digital adoption piece, and then we'll get to the frontline worker, because I think by defining those two, we're going to be able to just jump off into the deep end of the pool real quickly.
Excellent.
So when you think about digital adoption, because you can maybe start with your origin story, I think that'll help articulate this rather than some industry standard definition around it, because I think stories tell a better picture. So why don't we start there?
I love that. Yeah, and the digital adoption platform space is an interesting one in the definition. So I think it'll make more sense if I go back. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk that through. So I actually began my career in the mobile technology space. For the better part of 2 decades, I was helping large companies design, deploy, and support large-scale mobile technology solutions for frontline workers. So this was a lot of work around aviation, where many of their employees are frontline workers doing things actually out in the front lines of their business, food and beverage distribution, retail, field service. So all of those are industries or segments where a disproportionate amount of the workforce are out in the front lines doing work somewhere in the field or out in a facility. And with that background, as we were helping these companies roll these solutions out, they would allocate millions or tens of millions of dollars to roll out technology to thousands or sometimes tens of thousands.
Well-intentioned, good reasons too.
Absolutely. And what would happen is we'd go back after the fact and say, so how's it working? How well is it working? And they were
always positive conversations. Great. Everybody's using it. It's changed the landscape of work.
Sarcasm alert right there. Yes. So that was the frustration, is most of the time there was extensive planning that went into picking just the right device and just the right accessories and just the right software and just the right workflows. Very little time was spent thinking about how we're going to train them and then support them on day 2 and beyond, and make sure that we really get the engagement that we need. And in preparation for this session right now, Christopher, you and I talked about, the fact that IT often owns the responsibility of the deployment of that technology, but it really shouldn't be their responsibility. They don't have the background or experience or knowledge to worry about adoption successfully. And so they often don't, and it often gets overlooked. So,
and I think on that, in addition to that, there's also this idea that can be perpetuated. I hear it all the time is, well, this solution, and this goes back to your point on, there's this quest for the Holy Grail to find the perfect platform to accomplish this, or build the perfect platform. And that can lead to a mindset of, this is such a fantastic product, or it's so well designed, the UX is so intuitive, it doesn't need that. People are just going to use it because it's just so intuitive and so easy, and it so solves their problem. They're just going to do it. And again, I think that's one of the Achilles heels of that, is then you end up in this conversation of, well, why didn't it work? Well, maybe we got something wrong. We need to go buy another solution or retune the UX because that must be it. And as a learning professional, you just go, wait, no. Like, there's a whole lot more going on there.
And they end up spending twice as much money and twice as much time trying to get it right after the fact. I have I think it's a funny story that I was talking to an executive. I'll save the proper names, but outside of a work context, it was a personal context. We were doing some volunteer work. I ran into this executive for one of the largest food and beverage manufacturers on planet Earth. And we happened to get into talking about, hey, what do you do? What do I do? We had that conversation. And he told me that they were in the midst of rolling out new technology to all of their delivery drivers. So of course my ears perked up. This is my space. And I said, oh, what are you rolling out? How are you planning to ensure that they all use the technology correctly? Literally, this is a quote. He said, well, we're rolling out iPhones, so we don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
And it speaks to just the problem that you're talking about. Well, what's really interesting, I think, as a follow-up to that story is I ended up talking to several people inside that organization in their OCM and L&D roles who all said that that was obviously not true. They were rolling out iPhones, but they weren't getting just perfect adoption right out of the gate. And really what we've come to realize is, particularly with frontline workers, there's this inseparable connection between the workflows that those men and women are doing in their job and the technology that large companies are now pushing to the edge of their workforce. And so when you have that combination, it's not just about the tech. It's not just about are the buttons easy to read and is the UI easy to see and kind of figure out. It's connecting all of that technology back to the work that these men and women have to do and understanding that context. And really, probably more important even than just the knowledge, it's giving them the confidence that they need to be successful in that role using that technology. It scares them. Many of the frontline workers in the global economy get very nervous about the implementation of new technology. They feel threatened by it. They feel vulnerable that this technology is essentially being designed to
eliminate my role
in the future.
I mean, we see this happening with generative AI right now.
Yes.
People are in many regards terrified of it.
Yes.
Under the impression that this technology is basically building a foundation to eliminate the need for me to do my job type of a thing, which there is some truth in that.
Sure.
But not necessarily. And I think that's where that adoption piece comes into play, because if you don't address the adoption piece right, that's the vacancy you're leaving in the conversation, and people don't fill that vacancy with good things.
Yeah.
And as a result, like you said, they just go, I'm staying away from it.
Caterpillar makes big backhoes so that, men and women don't need to dig holes with shovels anymore, right? That's a great innovation that's come around over the last 100 years, but there's still plenty of open positions in the construction industry, right? Yeah. So things are going to shift around a little bit. And I think part of ensuring
and to that point, I don't think anybody's complaining about having to use a backhoe or a bulldozer for something that they used to have to manually shovel for.
That's
and I think that's one of the things. And Leah, you mentioned this, and I think this is really important. It is helping explain to them why they need this stuff and helping connect those dots. And I think that's exactly what we're getting at. And when you look at it through just a purely technical lens of, well, this app does this.
Yes.
It's not drawing that contextual fiber.
That's an important part. And I want to define what I think of when I think of a frontline worker. We actually used to refer to them as deskless workers in our marketing and on our podcast and things like that. But what we realized is that frontline work actually extends out even into some roles that are essentially based at a desk. So I would add contact center employees and inside sales and things like that as roles that they kind of meet the same characteristics. They are talking with your customers. They are the face of your brand to your customers. They deal with revenue in many cases. They may not actually be taking a payment, but the work that a field service employee does or a delivery driver does is triggering a revenue event. So when we go into retail, that revenue event happens at a cash register. But if I'm having something repaired, that revenue event is happening when that field service technician does that repair, replaces that equipment, or whatever the case may be. So there's a direct connection to revenue. And then the other thing is, and I've already mentioned this, but their workflows have now become inseparable with the technology that they have to use. So all of those conditions are what really to us make up a frontline worker. And those workflows are hugely important. And in fact, I witness this all the time. I mentioned to you earlier, Christopher, that I've been on a bunch of ride-alongs with field service technicians lately. And one of the complaints that I often hear when I do a ride-along in the field is that the new technology is great, but it's actually costing me more time. And that's interesting, especially when we talk about the way that many people feel vulnerable about the introduction of technology. Well, the reason that the technology was rolled out in several of these cases was not necessarily to save time for the field service technician. It was actually to grab more data from the work that they're doing in the field so that the company can deliver a better experience back to their customers, so they can have a real-time dashboard of how your equipment is performing, right? It actually might have a net increase in the amount of time that a field service technician takes to use the technology.
What's funny about that, well, I'm going to let you finish because I feel like there's a couple of these that we can go down the rabbit hole that I want to, because it's an important rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, and so I think just to maybe just close the loop on that topic, it is really about the context then, right? So it's about explaining to that field service technician, listen, yes, this technology is being introduced. Yes, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable when you first start to use it. And yes, it may in fact actually cost you a little bit of time. But now let's fill that in with an explanation to say why that's important. Because you know that 25% of the time you're having callbacks to go back to your customer for something that could have been avoided, right? Well, what can we do to eliminate those callbacks? What can we do to make sure that you have the right parts in your truck when you show up on site? All of those things that contribute to poor performance or poor customer experience can be resolved by taking 2 extra minutes to fill out this data in your application. So we have to provide the knowledge, and we have to do it in context so that they understand why they're being asked to make this change. And that will really grease the skids for better adoption across the board.
Well, and where I want to go with this on the context piece, because I do want to come back to see, now I'm torn on this. Because the context is going to go deeper. So I do want to rezone back in on your broader definition of frontline worker, because I think that's an important distinction. Because when we over categorize, like you said, and we say, well, frontline, those are deskless workers, that is a very limiting segment of the market. And granted, that's still a big segment of the market. Those may be the people that are out on the front lines, doing service work. They may be, at the registers doing things like this in stores. But like you said, frontline workers, there are non-deskless workers that are also very much frontline workers. And I think about this in the healthcare field a lot, because who are the first people you interact with when you go into a hospital or when you go into this? They're sitting behind a desk. So to say, well, they're not actually frontline workers. Actually, you're writing off a huge percentage of the population who they're struggling with a lot of this stuff, and they're dealing with a lot of similar challenges that the frontline workers are, that are deskless. That is different from like the corporate kind of behind the scenes running the COE type of a thing. And it's not completely unique, but I think there are these different market segments that we have to think differently about.
Well, so I'm one of those people that mischaracterized the frontline workforce as being entirely synonymous with deskless. And very fortunately for us, it was our customers who began to expand our view of that a little bit. So my background was in mobile technology, and I saw this problem existing in mobile technology. And our team said, why don't we divert our energy to trying to solve the technology adoption problem in this space instead of just adding more and more tech solutions for them to adopt? And so that was really the origin of Skyfull, saying, how can we create a platform that helps these large companies that want to get better adoption from their mobile technology ensure the success of their frontline workforce and therefore the success of the project? So that is around the origin of Skyfull. We started as a mobile only solution with a field first mentality, and we wrongly believed that the problem only existed in the mobile side of things, right? And it wasn't until we were bringing this product into the market and we started, meeting with some of these large companies who said, yes, we do have this problem with our field service team. Yes, we do have this problem with our retail associates who are using, iPads on the store floor, but we're also having this problem with inside sales and customer service. Can you help us with those folks as well? And that kind of caught me, I'll admit, it caught me by surprise, because there are so many technology platforms on the market today that provide a digital adoption, solution around desktop applications in a browser. What we learned from that experience, and you've actually had some amazing guests on your show that come from the DAP space, and we hold them in very high regard. They're obviously doing amazing work for browser-based applications and some of that in the moment support. But several of your guests have actually described the traditional digital adoption platforms as if they are GPS navigation for your enterprise apps. I think that's a really interesting way for them to describe it, because I think it's accurate. Number one, I think it's a good analogy for them to use to describe the value of a traditional DApp in the context of enterprise technology.
Which, for anybody watching and listening who may be hearing DApp and going, I don't know what you're talking. Digital adoption platform, which is essentially the overlay technology that's sitting on top. So,
and most of those players are primarily working in the browser space inside a Chrome browser, and they're providing kind of nudging support. They're just like what Apple Maps is for us when we're driving around town. It gives us a nudge, turn right, turn left to go here and go there. The way I always say that to, when we have this conversation with our customers, I ask, would you train your teenager how to drive a vehicle with Apple's turn-by-turn navigation? And the answer is no. You assume a certain level of proficiency, of knowledge with somebody operating a vehicle. Then you can use turn-by-turn navigation to guide them to where they need to go.
Yeah.
But if we're educating somebody from the ground up, assuming zero knowledge of how to use this system, which in most cases, you're coming into a large enterprise, you're going to be working in a contact center or in a field service role, you've never used this software before. And even if you have used that brand of software, you've never used it implemented the way this enterprise has.
No.
Right?
Yeah, because no matter how much a SaaS is only configurable versus customizable, the way organizations configure and even their business processes,
it goes back to the workflows.
So distinct. It's like, it doesn't.
The workflow and the tech go together, right? And that's why it's so incredibly unique. So sure, they could be going from Salesforce to Salesforce, but it's company A to company B, and it's like a completely different environment, right? So when we approached this problem with Skyfull, we said we have to assume that the user's coming into this environment with no prior knowledge about how to use these devices and how to use the software. So really the competitor for Skyfull is not one of the traditional digital adoption platforms. It's actually training environments set up. But our customers are telling us that training environments are incredibly costly. They're time consuming to maintain, and they're unstable, and they don't replicate all of the types of transactions and workflows that they need to replicate to properly train their frontline team members. And so that's really the problem that Skyfull is solving, is we're creating simulations of the enterprise software that can navigate a user from zero knowledge all the way up to a high level of proficiency and give them the competence and confidence that they need to hit the ground running when they start dealing with your customers.
The part I want to expound on this, that I think it's an important clarification, because to anybody who's listening who is in the L&D, or, honestly, I have a lot of IT leaders who are part of this, and I spend a lot of my time talking to IT, CIOs, CTOs, talking about this, because they often don't have that human-centric side, and it's not their fault. It's just they're more focused on the technical requirements and how do we make sure this works. And I get it. It's like, that's why we all have to work together. We all bring different things. But I think the part that what you just described for practitioners thinking about this, that is very distinctly different when you're stepping into the digital adoption spaces, understanding what your audience is doing and how they're using this software. And a lot of times, deep, thoughtful conversations about that going into it get overlooked. And to your point, we treat things like a knowledge worker would treat it, where we go, oh, okay, when you go into Workday to put in an expense report, let's use digital adoption to help walk you through, which is a great use case, by the way, because people may not do that all the time. And they're like, I'm stuck. Like, gosh, I only do this like once a month. I forget. But that's different, because that's not part of your work.
Right.
That's like a task you're asking somebody to do in a system that's distinct from your work. And the reason that you need that is, yes, you want business process adoption because you want to make sure people do it right, so you don't end up with things breaking down the line. But what shifts, and I think this is where you see a big distinction in frontline workers, and I think there are some knowledge workers that play in the space as well, is when the system actually is so integrated into their work, you cannot separate the two.
You cannot.
And that's a different use case and a different audience, where you're going, we can't, like you said, we can't just do step-by-step guidance, because this is, we're dealing about their whole job. Their whole job is built on this. This isn't just, I'm trying to do this once and I forgot how. That's a different use case in a different application.
Well, and you just about touched on something else I want to expand on a little bit. The other thing that makes these frontline workers role different is that they are doing what they're doing in front of our customers.
Yeah.
That's hugely different. If you and I, like we were, messing around with StreamYard, the platform we're working on right now, right? It was just you and me. We were off on the side on our browsers. We were getting set up. There was no pressure. Nobody was watching us. You and I could go through that process and make sure that we did some troubleshooting. And had we had any difficulties, we could have done a quick search online and nobody would have known the difference and nobody would have been impacted. I was out with a truck driver for a food and beverage distribution company one day, and he said, I was asking him about his comfort level with the technology, and he immediately had a stressful, anxious response to this conversation. And I said, well, why does that make you feel so anxious? And he said, well, nobody here understands, pointing back to the building. He said, nobody here understands that when I'm having a problem with this dumb device and app, I'm standing in front of the customer.
Right.
And this is
making me look stupid.
Yes. And Christopher, this is a phrase I will never forget. He said, I feel like I'm standing on an island by myself. So think about that. Think about, first of all, the self-awareness that this truck driver, delivery driver, is expressing to some guy that he'd now known for 5 minutes at this point. But he needed to get this off his chest. He's like, guys, this is frustrating for us. We're out there.
It's embarrassing.
It is hugely embarrassing. So they've got a manager of the store, of Walmart or of Kroger, saying, hey, you were supposed to deliver this last week and we didn't get it last week. It didn't show up on the truck. And the guy's fumbling around with his software to make sure that he can fix that transaction so that when he shows up 3 days from now with the next delivery, he's got it right. But he's not doing that in isolation like you and I were before this session. He's doing that standing in a retail store in front of their customers, in front of his customer. And that's a pretty stressful experience for him. So we have to look, all of us that are building technology solutions and deploying them out to the edge of the workforce, we have to make sure that we're giving them the skills that they need and the confidence that they need so that when they're standing there in those situations, they have the knowledge that they need to resolve it and they have access to resources that will give them the answers that they need when they need it.
And this, I'm so glad we went the direction we did, because this just has perfectly set this up, which Leah, thanks for the comment on this. This is such an important point, because this is what happens when we don't, and again, whether it's a physical ride along or whether it's actually taking the time to engage with and talk to your people and understand, help me understand what it's really like to go through things with you. It's why for years I do virtual coffees with employees across the organization to just have those conversations you had. Like, help me understand what's going on. Put me in that space. Help me realize this. And again, we try sometimes to process optimize and digitally transform our way out of problems. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with people. There's a person on the other side of this, and they're dealing with all the things you just described. Shame, identity, they don't want to look dumb. Like all of this stuff is going into it. And so we can quickly go, well, see, the app didn't work. And it's like, or maybe we need to consider the context of where this app is being used and how it's being used and why it may just be easier for them to go, I'm not going to do this because I would rather give a great customer experience than fumble around with something I don't understand.
Well, and a great example, so first of all, Leah, I love your comment. I love the mention of Undercover Boss. I love getting out into the field. I refer to them as my field trips. It is the best time for me to go out and see how the men and women on the front lines are actually doing their job and the challenges that they face. And it informs us at Skyfull, and we try to bring that data back to our customers to help them understand. Because sometimes if I do a day or two ride along with some of their field techs or go out with a delivery driver, I may have seen more of the action in the field than some of the people at their own corporate office, which is a shame, number one. But number two, it does give me some great insights about what's actually happening out there. An example of this, and it kind of is what you were just talking about, Christopher, is I was out with a field service technician just a couple of weeks ago, and they have literally 6 to 8 applications that these field service technicians are supposed to be using when they're out on site with a customer, and they're checking different measurements, they're recording different things, and all of that is supposed to be entered into an application that then goes back and populates the dashboard for the customer that I was talking about before. Well, what was interesting is I went on this ride along, and on our first visit, I noticed he pulled out his notepad, laid it on the drum of chemicals that he was working alongside, and started recording all of the measurements manually. And I asked him why he was doing that. And he said, well, the app is difficult for this and the app is difficult for that. And he went through a whole laundry list of reasons why he was essentially working around the technology and its intended use. He was reverting back to manual processes that actually take more time, introduce potential error and all of that other stuff. And then later, after that service call, we went and sat at a coffee shop where then he tried to transfer all of the numbers over from the written notes into the application. That kind of stuff you don't know unless you've actually been out in the field. Because guess what? The data eventually made it in the software. So if you're sitting back at the corporate office and you're looking at the dashboard, you say, okay, well, there are numbers
data made
in
it.
those fields.
Great.
The data made it into the back, right? We fed the beast and we got the data in there. Number one, it wasn't timely because that data was entered hours after the actual numbers were taken. Was the error correction that you have in those fields that make sure that the number's supposed to be between this number and that number, that error correction was defeated because he'd written it down on paper now. And if he'd taken the wrong reading off of a gauge, he didn't have the technology to say, hey, that looks like it's out of range. Can you double check that? So we've lost that capability because it was all handwritten. So I could go on and on. You would never know that unless you actually had been out in the field. So to anybody serving the men and women on the front lines with their technology, you have to get out there and see a day in the life. We've always said you can't build mobile technology solutions from a conference room. I've been saying that for probably 10 years. I'm going to say it for 10 more, because unless you go out in the field and understand the tools that they're using, the environmental conditions that they're standing in. I took a picture from that day that I was just describing about of my shoes that were standing in an inch of water. So I'm literally in the basement of this building right next to this field service technician, and we're standing in an inch of water. I guarantee very few people in that company's headquarters have ever had to do their job standing in an inch of murky water, but that's what this technician was doing. And this is what he does every day. So what are the things that we can learn from his or her experiences when we're out there doing those observations? And what are those insights we can bring back in to say, how can we ensure in this context now that they can be successful with the technology tools that we're investing in?
Well, and on that front, and then I want to jump to another one that I'm going to push. It may come across as a challenge to this, but actually I think it's an encouragement to folks, because what I've heard and experienced with this is that sometimes people look at that and go, well, I just can't always do that. Mm-hmm. And to me, the other thing I've seen with that is I've seen people do that and not get the result you just described. And to me, this is deconstructing what's actually happening when you're on that ride along. Mm-hmm. Because to me, that's one of those things where it's like, you can go follow people around and have it be a toxic experience for those employees. And they dread you being there because you are burdening them. You're on their back. You're not listening to them. You're too busy trying to solve their problem for them, instead of going into it going, I'm here to listen and observe and have you share this with me. And I think that's almost more of a mindset thing, an approach you take, because listening to you describe what you did on that, I've seen people go on site and then I talked to the people after and they hated it because some corporate blowhard shows up, thinks they have all the answers, tells everybody what they do, is critiquing everything, and then coming back with another, swirl of great ideas that they're going to then push out. And I think that's one of those things where we have to be so careful and go, are we actually looking through the lens of, you know more than I do?
Yeah.
And I'm here to empathize with you and listen carefully and see instead of fix your problem, so that I can really stand in your shoes. Going back to your point, standing in the shoes,
literally,
whether it's physically or not physically, that should be the goal, instead of, how, and I think that's where we can get creative with some of this for people who may go, well, I just never had the opportunity to do that, so I guess I can go like this. Like, no, there are ways that you can stand in their shoes, whether you physically stand in their shoes or not.
Yeah. Christopher, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because perhaps I've developed some best practices that I've taken for granted that I hadn't really thought much about. Because I have been doing this for a long time, going out into the field to see, the activities and how they're being performed. One thing I think I almost always do, but I know for certain that the 6 I've done in the last 60 days, I actually had a prep call with each of those people, or at least a quick 30-minute session before we actually left the shop or left whatever our start point was for the day. And I said, here's what I'm here to do. First of all, your company cares enough about you to let me spend a day with you. The whole reason that they're doing this is because they want to get another set of eyes and ears on how things are going in your day. And it's all the things that you just talked about. I'm not here to critique your work. You know more about doing this function than I'll ever know, but we can't help you unless we get some greater level of understanding about the challenges that you're facing and where you have those obstacles. And I'm telling you, you may not feel like your company cares a lot, but the fact that I'm here is indication that they do.
It's an indication they're investing in this.
Right. And so we start the conversation. I won't go through all the details of that, but I also make a commitment to them that I am not going to share anything about their workflows or their workarounds that they don't want me to share. And I have had experiences where they say, hey, listen, I know the company really wants me to do it this way, but I do it this other way. So what I do, because I'm going to honor the commitment that I've made in the field, is I look for other ways to kind of talk about when I get back and kind of do a readout of my day.
Sanitize it to protect
completely,
to protect, your source while still addressing the problem.
Exactly. And so I think that's really helped. And it didn't occur to me that maybe others haven't really developed some of those practices and maybe they come out a little bit too aggressively. But as you described that, I said, yeah, I can imagine that happening. And it actually,
what you just described leads us into the next point, which what you just described there is the human-centered context you provide to doing that.
Right.
And absent of that, some consultant shows up with a clipboard, riding along with me, looking at what I'm doing. That is not going to be received as this company cares about you. They're invested in you. We want to do this to improve and tweak and adjust this kind of thing. And without that context, it's, big brother's sending a consultant in to look at what I'm doing and take notes on what I'm not following. And I'm going to get written up and and it may not even be that, but I think this is what we're getting at, is this context, which ties into digital adoption so tightly, is that, here comes another app that feed data back to the machine to decide where they can optimize my job and all this stuff. Yeah, if you don't give the context like you just described for that ride along, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah, I do one other thing. This is just a little tip. I didn't think we were going to be talking about these things today, but I think it's funny that maybe I've just developed some of these habits, as I said, without even really being aware of it. I always ask the people that I'm writing with how they dress for their job. And to the extent possible, I try to kind of get close with my attire to how they're going to dress. Now, I haven't worn like a jumpsuit for a field service technician or something like that. But, if they're wearing safety vests, I want to wear the same safety vest that they're wearing. I was out with a set of field techs the other day. They wore slacks instead of jeans. So I made sure to wear slacks on all of those ride-alongs. And the reason that I do that is I don't want to look different to their customers than they do. I want to look like one of those guys to them. And because I don't want to show up with a sports coat on and look like a corporate suit, right? Coming in and have this person
going back to what you said before.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing to be on your iPad and struggling with the thing in front of a customer. It's embarrassing to have your boss is following you.
Yeah.
It's an embarrassing thing. And this goes back to thinking we're dealing with people. Right. We're dealing with people. And so we have to take all these things into account when we're like, this is a human being on the other end of this.
Right.
And how are they experiencing that?
And our job needs to be to prop them up, to make them feel better. Here's the thing, Christopher. If you've never spent a day in the life of one of these people on the front lines, we talk about them like they're some kind of pawns. We put numbers on a whiteboard or on a spreadsheet, and we talk about them as if they're these widgets that we move around in our supply chain. But as you and I have talked about now on the show for 30 minutes, like they are human beings that have...
This is a human being.
It is a human being dealing with other human beings. And we talk all about customer experience. It's one of the top 3 priorities of most CIOs around the world, is making sure their customer experience is solid. Well, the people that are the face of your organization to those customers are people too. And so we really talk about this inside our organization, that at the end of the day, we're a technology platform. We're a SaaS company. You can use all those other terminology, but we are people building technology to support other people. That's what we do. That's our ethos. And that's a really important distinction, because it also reminds us then that we have to go understand the people elements of this. It doesn't matter how many things we can automate and all the nifty stuff that we can do with pixels on the screen. What we really need to do is make sure that we're thinking of these a little bit harder to identify aspects of their world. And we need to, the confidence thing is the biggest thing for me. the number of times that I hear employees say, well, nobody told me how to do that. I don't know how to do that. It's really mind-numbing. Microsoft did a study last year of frontline workers. I'm sure you guys have all seen this, but I just have to repeat it because I think it was pretty powerful. 55% of frontline workers that were surveyed said that they got no formal training on how to use their technology. Now, here's what's interesting. I don't know that that number is accurate. I believe Microsoft got that data from their survey. That's not what I'm questioning. What I'm questioning is, did 55% of the employees really not get training from their company? I don't know. It seems a little bit high to me. I bet those companies feel that they had given them some training. But at the end of the day, those frontline employees came away feeling that they hadn't been trained properly in order to do their job. So it doesn't really matter.
And that's what matters.
That is what matters. It doesn't matter
what matters.
Doesn't matter how many PowerPoints you created. Doesn't matter how many e-learning courses you created. If the employee that you're expecting to be successful in their role comes away feeling less competent than they need to, and therefore less confident than they need to be, they're the ones standing in front of your customers, and they feel like they're standing on an island. So how can we resolve that?
Well, and as we talk about this, and I think this again goes back to we're starting to unpack some of the philosophical complexity of human existence, which makes sense. And
can you extend the live stream? We're going to need a couple of hours.
Yeah, right. You said this was going to be like a Joe Rogan episode, and here we go. But I mean, really, as you start unpacking this, and it's an important conversation to have, and it's only going to get more important as things like generative AI and other things just continue stepping on the main stage, because the existential crisis of people going, do I still matter? Mm-hmm. At a time when many people in an organization already feel like their organization doesn't think they do. And that's exactly what you're getting at with frontline workers when we talk about them like pawns. And they're just these, it's like, there's a human being deserving of dignity, and they are a valuable asset to your organization, and they matter a lot. And your organization doesn't move forward. And just because maybe they make less than you, or because they're in a different position, they are no less valuable to your organization than the key executives at the top type of a thing. Different role, different responsibility. And that mindset shift suddenly fundamentally changes things, because going back to feelings, they matter. Going back to, it doesn't matter what the data says. And I think this is where, no matter how much we automate or optimize or AI gets involved with things, the contextual, and this is what we keep coming back to, that context matters. You got the best training suite of solutions, the best tech, the best adoption of programs that you have. Yet at the end of the day, the way people feel on the end of that is, you don't really care about me. You're just trying to do this to squeeze another ounce of, blood out of the rock so that you can feed somebody else, type of a thing.
That the CEO can get another big bonus and more stocks.
So that he can get another big bonus and tell me, sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. If you don't like it here, go work somewhere else. You're not going to see that. And I think that's where it's this intersection of human and tech, and getting that right makes it, night and day difference.
Yeah. There's another big element of this that what you just described, Christopher, is making me think about one of the things that I think is very different between traditional knowledge worker development versus those folks on the front lines, and that is time. If you or I have a new CRM solution that we had to use as part of our job, or new accounting software, we are afforded the time that we need to learn how to use that technology. And if we stop doing our job for a day or two so that we can go sit in a classroom for 2 days to get caught up, on the new technology, that's an appropriate use of our time, and it's an appropriate way to deliver that content to us in many cases. And our customers aren't going to not get their deliveries because you and I were sitting in a classroom for the day.
Right.
But frontline workers, it's a completely different realm. They don't have the time that the rest of us have, because if they're supposed to do 10 deliveries a day, guess what? When you're rolling out new technology, they still need to do 10 deliveries a day. And if they're a field service employee and they're expected to close 5 service orders a day, they're still expected to close those 5 service orders a day, because
new technology or not,
doesn't matter. So think about that. Let's say for a minute that they can get over the vulnerability to the potential for automation and some of that stuff. I think the next thing on the list of priorities that causes them stress and frustration, and therefore poor adoption of your technology, is the allocation of time.
Yep.
We have to find 100%. Ways to build the content, of course, we do this at Skyfull, but whether you're using Skyfull or not, you have to bring this process into timeframes that make sense in their environment. So you can make content available to them, but if they think that it's going to take them 15 or 30 minutes to go find the right answer, I will tell you what I witnessed over the last 60 days. They just pick up the phone or they text one of their buddies in the organization and they say, hey, how do I do this thing? They're not going to go look at your content because they don't want to have to go sift through a 30-minute e-learning course to go find the answer to a question. And so what's happening is and again, this is one of those things that you don't see until you can see it with your own eyes. But you go out in the field and you see that some of your highest performing field service techs or account managers or whatever that are in the field, they're the ones that are getting the calls from their colleagues saying, how do I do this? How do I do that? Help me. I'm in a pinch.
They are the shortcut.
They are the shortcut. I'm standing on an island. I'm standing in front of a customer. I don't remember how to close out this work order. I literally witnessed these calls happening. Employees are FaceTiming one another and sharing their screen so that they can figure out how to do something on the application. And that is a black hole of time for everyone involved. The employee with the problem is not productive at that moment. The employee is now dragging somebody else down with them because they need help and they can't get
their inefficient is becoming someone else's inefficiency.
They're both standing in front of your customers. So we've already said, hey, this is the face of your brand to your customer base. So you've got two employees that are standing face to face with your customer, and they're both doing something that has nothing to do with serving that customer. They're using your clunky enterprise technology. They're both frustrated. They're probably both saying things that you wish they weren't saying in front of the customer, all because they don't know how to use that.
I know exactly what you're talking about, right? Like I deal with folks like this. I mean, I love engaging with even people who come deliver packages to my house for this very reason.
Yes.
Because you see it. I go sit and talk to the cable guy as he's installing cable. And I know exactly what you're talking about because they're like, yeah, this stupid, blah, blah, blah. And all these things you are like, they're saying this to the customer. And it's like, you don't get around that by yelling at them because it's like, they're right. It's just coming out.
Yeah. Let me give you a great story. Actually, in our office, we had signed up for a new coffee delivery service. This is brilliant. I love this when it happens because of course they're walking into the Skyfull office. And so, yes, I'm going to do exactly what you just said, which is I'm going to inquire. I'm not going to interrogate, but I am going to inquire about their use of technology and things like that. And so this first time delivery came to our office and said, hey, I'm here to deliver, set up your coffee maker and bring you all the supplies that I'm supposed to give you. And he said, can you tell me what I'm supposed to deliver? Which flavors did you want? And I said, well, that's strange because I went through an entire process with the sales team to decide what flavors we were going to get. And we polled the employees and we got, all this information. And he's standing there with a tablet. He had an iPad mini in his hand. I said, surely that information's in that tablet. He goes, oh no, they don't give us what's in the order in the tablet. And I said, respectfully, that's nearly impossible because like the first thing in delivery software would be to tell you what you need to do the delivery. So I contacted the CEO of the company after. I didn't give that guy a hard time. He was just doing his job.
He's just doing his job.
Yeah. I went back and I pulled up the email that had my email receipt and I said, here's the things I need. French vanilla for me because that's my favorite. And then whatever everybody else wanted, right? And he got the order delivered. Okay. So the job got done. The delivery got closed. I went back and I did contact the CEO of that company. And I said, listen, I don't know exactly what software you have. I wasn't involved, obviously, in the project, but I suspect that one of your top criteria on your list of software selection was being able to tell your delivery guys.
I guess it made the requirements list.
I'm pretty sure that was on the list. He said, well, of course that was on the list. And I said, well, how did you train them? And he said, well, we bring them into a classroom and we take them out of the field for half a day and we give them this whole data dump and then we send them out in the field. And I said, well, that's not working, right? Because this guy needed me to do something that he was supposed to know how to do. Your software, should have known how to do. So he's invested all this money in this technology and the people, and he's taken somebody out of the field for half a day, and then it didn't work. That's the problem. That's the kind of problems that we're solving for. We have to be able to give them the education that they need in small snippets. We have to use a micro-learning approach to this. And somebody who's now actually on the board of Skyfull gave me an expression. This may be familiar to all of you, but he was the first one that had said it to me. He talked about this concept of minimum viable proficiency. And I think that really, it resonated with me because I think in this workforce, in their time-constrained work life, we have to say, okay, we're rolling out new technology, or we're rolling out a big enhancement to this tech, or we've got some new features that we're rolling out. What's the minimum viable proficiency that we can develop these people to have so that they can then go be successful in the software? And then what resources do we give them to go get the additional help when they need it in the moment, right? And in the flow of their work. And that's really what the Skyfull platform is all about. It's what we believe and what we're trying to enable. And again, whether you're using Skyfull or whether you've come up with other, tool sets to deliver
that's where what you're saying is so important for practitioners to hear on this, because this is one of the biggest things that even if you have, let's say, Skyfull and the tech is capable of doing it, it's in our hands in many cases what ends up happening with that. And I've seen organizations have the best platforms, but then it gets in the mindset of somebody who's like, well, the MVP, right, but different than the product.
Yes.
This is something that I think when we think about learning from an education standpoint, we miss, because it's like, well, what is all the stuff that people might need to know? And let's just build their knowledge base. And it's like, that's great if you're going back to grad school and studying philosophy and you have time to just ruminate and think deeply about this stuff. When you're asking somebody, what kind of coffee am I supposed to get you? And where do I find that information so I don't look stupid as I deliver this to somebody and go, what did you want me to give you? I went through 89 steps to get this to you. That is a different arena. And saying, what do they actually need to be able to do that? Well, we'll make the other resources available. We'll put it there so that people can over time build this up, but we're not going to try and eat the whole elephant at once.
That's right.
That's something we as practitioners have to do. And this goes back to what we said from the very beginning. Why does L&D play such a critical role in system and digital adoption? And it drives me bonkers when I see IT go, well, we don't deal with training. And I see L&D go, well, we don't deal with systems.
Yeah.
Because you're left with this mess we've been talking about for almost an hour, just goes unsolved, and it destroys customer experience, employee experience. I mean, the whole thing just collapses in on itself.
I think some of the traditional L&D practices also, it's kind of tied to this concept of minimum viable proficiency. I know that is counter to a lot of what we would traditionally approach to say, here are all the things that are going to need to be successful, big picture, long-term, right?
Well, and to be fair, a lot of times stakeholders, that's what they're pushing.
Yes.
Well, here's everything we need. And it's our job to stand in between that.
100%. Here's something that's really interesting that we found, and we have data to support this now. Lessons inside the Skyfull platform that have more than 14 steps have an exponentially higher failure rate on knowledge checks.
Sounds good.
That
sounds about right.
This is real data, right? And we've had, I'd say, I'm going to say debates, but it's really in some cases outright arguments with stakeholders on the customer side, where a SME said, no, you don't understand. This process really takes 50 steps out in the field. So we have to teach them all 50 steps. Okay, that may be true. They may need to know all 50 steps to do this function. We talked about the workflows and the technology, being inseparable. And I agree with that. That doesn't mean that that's how we have to deliver the knowledge to them. And oftentimes when you really inspect, if you go out and do a ride along with these guys and you really inspect what that workflow is, it's actually a bunch of smaller workflows that have been stitched together to complete a full process inside of your customer. So if you think about how we deliver that, if we all accept that building their competence and confidence is of critical importance to the success for them and of the program, then how can we actually build their confidence? Is that going to be by giving them 50 and 60 step processes that are going to overwhelm them and cause them to be stressed?
We scaffold it.
We actually sabotage the process by trying to give them too much information. So if we can break that down into smaller chunks, deliver it to them in a meaningful, small approach that they can absorb into their day. The other value of that, which I think may be more important than building the initial knowledge for them, is that when they want to go back and use that resource for reference purposes, they can go back and find that little snippet. I don't want to go sit through a 15-minute lesson about how to process work orders or how to serve customers with their rate plan change. I want to be able to go to that thing, that one thing. I just need a reminder on that piece. Let me go back through that. Also, we haven't talked a lot about this, but I know there's a bunch of learning and development folks on here, maybe people that build content. The smaller chunks that we can break that content down into when we have changes in the software, which happens endlessly, we have to change less. We have to maintain
I know.
less
I
in the
know.
content.
I know. It makes a huge difference.
It's huge.
And it goes back to deconstructing. And I think that's one of the things where sometimes there's just such a rush to do a thing that we don't take the time to go, yes, but doing it well may take a few more steps on the front end, but it pays dividends. It pays dividends on the end. The other thing that I was just going to say, Leah, thank you so much for all your comments on this, because you're adding some really, really thoughtful ones on this and valuable. This is what gets me excited about what these technologies can do, because everything we're talking about, if you're still operating under, 5, sometimes even 6-month-old intel on what's possible in the space, it can feel like an impossible task.
Yep.
It can feel like there's just no way that we can do this. Well, there's only so many hours in the day, and some of this stuff just has to happen. But it doesn't. And I think getting to your point on this is that when we think about the fact, Leah, that you're spot on. These are human beings, going back to what we've said before. These are human beings. They have children. They have families. They have friends and social lives outside of this stuff. When we just continually burden them, well-intentioned, of, hey, I've got this new thing I need you to do. I know you got a million other things to do, but I have this other thing I need you to do on top of it. So just, can you find a way to squeeze that into your day? We are squeezing the life out of people. And you can be put in this paradox where you go, well, so what, do we just not do anything? And the answer is no. You look to innovations like this that optimize and streamline this. And this is why I get so excited about technology. People think I just love tech for tech.
No.
I'm like, no, this is actually bringing out a better capability in people and human beings by streamlining this stuff. So it's like, look, I'm not going to ask you to not go to your kid's soccer game because you've got to learn how to use this new tool. Actually, we've optimized this to fit into your flow so seamlessly. You don't have to feel stupid, and we actually can help you with this right away. And you actually get time back if you actually use this well.
Here's a neat anecdote that I think you'll appreciate. So our platform on the mobile side, we have the ability to track location where the content's being consumed, because it's on a mobile device and they're already tracking the location of the device for, routing and stuff like that. So we pull that data into the platform, and our customers can then look at where the content's being consumed. So we helped one of our delivery customers actually input all of their locations and put a geofence around that location, a quarter mile around that, location, whatever the case may be, so that we could discern how much content was consumed while that employee was actually on site versus that which was consumed when they were away. And in most cases, when they're away, that means that they are pulled up at a customer. So if you're a delivery organization, especially delivering into retail, you may pull up and you've got the red branded truck and the blue branded truck is in front of you at the dock. And so you have to wait for the blue branded truck to get out of your way so that you can back up your red branded truck and do your delivery. So you have 20 minutes of unscheduled downtime sitting behind that grocery store. What we found is we were seeing tens of thousands across this workforce. We were seeing tens of thousands of lessons being consumed by this workforce when they were offsite. So they were turning that downtime into something productive. There were also, when we went back and looked at the analysis of what lessons they were going through, there were some critical things. There were some goofy things that a direct store delivery driver has to deal with that may not happen all the time. So they have certain functions that they only have to do with certain clients. Well, there were lessons in their curriculum for that purpose. Those were the lessons that they were going into. So before they went in to see their customer, they were going back through the refresher to go get a lesson to say, before I get in there, I know this guy's going to ask me to do that return because last week he said he was going to have some returns. I got to do a return. I forget how to do a return in the customer order. Let me go in and see how to do returns before I walk inside. And that's amazing data for us to be able to bring back out. I knew that senior leadership in the organization would be thrilled that we were turning that downtime into something productive. But when you now look at that situation from the vantage point of the driver and say, we just gave the driver superpowers to be able to go get confident and competent about that thing that he needed to do before he walked inside to go see that customer, that's really profound impact of the humans. Huge. And we're helping to ensure the technology adoption.
This is, I wrote a rather spirited post about this the other day because I was looking at some research, and I get really frustrated when I hear the argument, do we focus on people or do we focus on performance? And I'm like,
Yes.
it is a false dichotomy. It is a false dichotomy that you have to choose between it.
No.
One example I'll share that just, again, this is the kind of stuff that just fuels me up and why I do what I do is I remember, and this is separate technology conversation, but I was similarly had understand the workflow of field sales people. And one of the things I noticed was there was people were frustrated with Salesforce adoption. So yes, they had done some of the digital adoption stuff, and that was great. But then when I talked to some of these folks and went, when do you do this? Simple question. When do you actually do this? Because I had looked at some of the data and I noticed the data was at a weird time. It was at the end of the day.
Yep.
I'm like, oh, who wants to do Salesforce stuff at the end of the day? So I had the conversation with them and a couple people, and they just shared, well, I don't have time because I'm in the car driving between these things. Like it's a nightmare for me to do this kind of stuff. And so this was some of my early days. This was years ago, playing with conversational AI, where we had integrated Siri. It wasn't Siri, but we had a bot that when they got done with a customer call, as they were driving, it would ask questions and they would just talk and it would put all their notes in Salesforce. And I remember talking to someone after, and they got emotional because they talked about the fact they never got to eat dinner with their kids because they would come home,
sit in their office,
and sit on their stupid computer and fill this stuff in. And it's not that they didn't want to give the information. They just felt burdened by like, oh, I got to do this. And if I don't, I'm going to get fired and all this stuff. And they got so emotional when we rolled this out and we said, we did this for you. Like, we want to give you that time back. And watching the impact that technology can have in optimizing this stuff. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, that's why it matters. Yes. Is it great that you can get better data and improve performance and improve customer experience and all this stuff? Yes. But at the same time, you genuinely can have a massive positive impact on the well-being and mental health of employees if you get this stuff right.
And the great thing is, if you do that, then the business benefits too. So you're not doing that.
It's not even like, well, the business has to take a hit on doing this. And that's the beauty of doing it right.
That's why these investments make so much sense. And that's why I think they're such an important element of what we do is really focusing on the people. Because at the end of the day, I've said this already on the show, but we are people building technology for other people. It's about the people that we have to get right. And whether you are Salesforce building the CRM solution or field service solution or whatever the case it is for those people. And yes, there's an element of asset management and customer, tracking and all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's people using that technology, and the people are going to be around for the foreseeable future. So we need to continue to focus on this. And as you said, we don't have to do that to the expense of the business. We do have to look at it as an investment. But, I've interviewed on our podcast, we've probably interviewed something like 30 or 40 OCM change management professionals. And one of the things that they gave me an insight to that wasn't obvious to me until they said it is that we think about change management often from just, what's all the change that's happening in their work life. But you alluded to this before. That's not the only change. The change burden that we're all dealing with is paying our mortgage, our car payments, our insurance just went up, our property tax went up, our kids not doing so well in school, or our kids doing great in school and I can't get to the award ceremony, right? All those other things that are happening. And I know you have a lot of children, so you must deal with a lot of those changes at home.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that.
So that's all real. So we come to work.
It's real.
And even if there's no change at work, we already are saturated with change in our life.
Yes.
And then we come in and say, oh, what do you mean? There's a whole new workflow that I have to do inside this application. Like, I just got this under my belt last week, and now you're telling me we have to change it again. So we have to make that process easier for them to adopt. And even if you don't listen to Christopher and I, and even if you don't agree that you should have empathy for the humans, do it selfishly because it'll improve the performance and the results of the company.
That's the thing. Right? That's why I love this stuff, because whether you're talking to somebody who doesn't care about people and only cares about performance, it's like, you know what? I can have that conversation and hopefully bring them along for the ride. And for the person who only cares about the people, and you go, you know what? But I'm going to keep your other stakeholders happy, because guess what? Everyone wins when we get this right.
Nobody gets promoted when you roll out new technology and you don't get the job done. So let's peel that back and figure out how to do it right. And you know, sometimes it seems like there's not budget on the front end of a project to do it right, but somehow we always find the budget to pay for it later when the project gets delayed and the scope changes.
we find the budget to buy the replacement system that we have to.
So let's just do it right on the front end. And if you've already been down that journey, maybe there's an opportunity to course correct, you know, before it goes too far down the bad path.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to wrap us up because on that note, I think that's a great ending point, even though I feel like you said, I could just keep going for a few more hours here. But thank you so much for this, Leah, and those commenting. Thank you so much for all your engagement on the conversation. And I hope this has really given a deeper insight into what it really means to take a human-centric approach to blending technology and people and performance. So thank you so much, Justin.
Thank you for the opportunity to be on today.
Staying in touch. Have a great week, everybody, and we will talk to you next week.